right now. We are now live. Okay, everybody's muted, but if you have a question, you can type your question into the question chat box, and Karen's here to help. She'll try to field the questions and let me know if we've got any questions. And I guess that's about it. So let me close. Let me go to Painter. Okay, now we're on Painter. And I think I can just close this. Let's do that, get rid of it. Do I need to close anything else? I probably ought to close my mail, just so there's plenty of room for everything. All right, I think that's it. We have 136 people that have registered so far. So we'll see how that comes out in attendance. Attendance is now up to 162. Okay, so we're recording and it's time to get started. I have something I wanted to talk about first. And the reason I want to talk about that is we keep talking about the fact that most of the brushes that we use, gosh, it feels so strange to everything to sound so quiet in the background. I'm expecting some sort of noise like when we have our small live sessions and there are only 15 or so of us. Everybody's unmuted and you hear telephones ringing and people breathing and all that stuff. It sounds so funny to be just dead. But anyway, back to the concept. We're going to talk about pressure and why it's really important. The first thing to know about pressure is that it's usually, I want to say that most brushes in Painter are pressure sensitive in one way or another. And that's the case with mine. In the case of this brush, which is, I don't want Desert Flow. Why didn't we go to Grainy Edge? Let's see if we'll get to it. Okay, now we're on Grainy Edge. And let me get a color of some sort. Let's just go to Indigo. Okay, if it's pressure related, usually a very light pressure will give you a very nice straight, not straight, but very thin line. As you increase your pressure, the stroke becomes fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter until it gets to the highest size or largest size that you have. And then as you reduce your pressure again, it begins to get smaller and smaller and smaller until you get back down to a very thin line. Okay? Now, that's really important. You want to be able to take your brushes, if they're set up to go from very thin to thick, you want to be able to take those brushes and be able to, use thick and thin pressure, or light and heavy pressure to get a thick and thin line. Now, just so you know, the thick and thin line is oops, I just realized this was open and it's probably blocking stuff. Let me move that over. The determination of getting this size from thick and thin happens right here on the size control panel. Now if we go up to Window, Brush Control Panels, and Size, that's the panel I'm looking at, the size panel. And it's the min size that makes the difference. Okay, so if I have the min size down to 0 and my size step at, below 5%, then I'm going to get to go thick and thin. Now, if I've changed that so that my min size comes up to like 50%, what that says is I can get the thick line, and the thin line I'm going to get will never be less than 50% or 49% of the maximum size. See, so I wouldn't get a very thin line there because my min size is all the way up here. Now, the other thing that's important is the fact that we have the expression as pressure, because if I had it as none, I'm not going to get anything except the flat line. It doesn't matter where the min size is because I have no way of getting there with no expression. Now I can change this expression to velocity, and the speed, see, as I go slower, well, those are kind of pretty. I like those. Anyway, it's the speed that determines whether you're going thick and thin.
I was gonna say you should save that brush, Skip.
Right. Well, it's like making little, ooh, look, nice little plant-like things. Anyway, velocity would be one way of determining. You can use any of these expressions to get, the thick and thin, but pressure is ideal for it. That's the easiest way to set it up, is with pressure. Let me make this a little lighter in color. Let's try this. Yeah, there we go. That'll give us a little bit better. We can see how the thickness of the brush will change or affect the color as well. Okay. Now, so size makes the difference in how that goes or how it works, but none of this is going to make any difference if your brush calibration is not set properly. And I should say brush tracking. They're two different things. So I'm going to come over here to Edit, Preferences, and I'm going to go to Brush Tracking. All right, right now my tracking is set up so that the last two sliders are all the way over to the right. And I just automatically set those like that because it makes, I know that I'm heavy-handed, and that will give me the best chance of getting a very thin and a very thick line. So if I come in here and I do a very light line, see how my pressure changes there? So I'm going to say okay with that. I'm going to come back to this brush, and you see how it's hard. I mean, I'm getting a thin line there, but I am just barely floating the pen on the tablet. I mean, it really is difficult for me to make that thin line. Now, if I go back to this again, and let's just bring these back again more and say okay. Now look, I don't care how light I press, I'm not getting that thick and thin line. So if you're not getting a thick and thin line, more than likely, if the brush is set up, size is set up to give you a thick and thin line, more than likely it is your brush calibration, brush tracking that you need to look at. So we go back up here to Preferences, Brush Tracking, and I wasn't getting anything then, and if I just take this all the way back up to the top, for my pressure, the natural pressure that I would work with on the tablet, that's going to give me the thinnest and thickest and nicest variation of thick and thin in between. Okay, now I leave my global tracking that way. Okay, now I'm going to go to to Bristly Dabs, another one of my brushes that you can get at my blog. And I'm going to go to 10mn. Now when we look at this one, we see that the min size is all the way up to 100%, and I don't have any expression. That's telling me, let me take that off, clone color. That's telling me that as I paint on this image, and let me change my paper to artist canvas so it'll look a little bit better. All right, so say now I'm getting the artist canvas texture. And notice that I'm not getting thick and thin, but that's because my min size is way up. If I wanted to get thick and thin, I could drop this down, and that's not going to make any difference until I change this to pressure. And now I'm going to be able to get thin and thick. But notice that when I first start pressing, when I first start making a line, I'm not getting anything. So with a very light pressure, I don't get a line, I don't get anything. I'm increasing my pressure, increase. All right, see, I really have to have a fair amount of pressure now to get any lines. Okay, so what's causing that? Well, there are a lot of things. What's happening really is I've got some other brush strokes that are set up, things like dry out and bleed and resaturation and stuff, that are also making the brush light when I start using a very light pressure. So if I'm trying to make these things close and stay in there, if I wanted to change my brush tracking, but for this brush only, then we have the option of brush calibration. Now that is also under Windows, under brush controls, and you come down till you find brush calibration. Make sure that that's checked. All right, now currently we're using global brush calibration, brush tracking. But if I click on Enable Brush Calibration, different from brush tracking, they work the same, it's just they're in different places. Brush calibration works specifically on a particular brush, where brush tracking is global. All right, now when I let go and just let it be normal, this was the default, notice that I can hardly get any thick and thin, but again, that's because this pressure is, fairly low. So I can click on this Set Brush Calibration Settings, and that will give me a brush tracking window, and I can run through the top, and I did sort of a medium to firm pressure, and that brought the pressure scale up and the power point down. So I'm going to say OK, and now when I begin to paint, see how I've got, it's much easier for me to make a thin line now than it was before. But that's only affecting this one brush. So if you need to tweak your brush calibration here, or tweak your specific brush in your brush calibration. Okay, so I'm not sure I'm making a lot of sense here, but what I'm trying to tell you is that if in fact you are using a brush and you try to paint with it and you get nothing, there are a number of reasons why that might happen. It could be that the brush is a blender. It doesn't add any color. You could be on a different layer than what you're supposed to be. But one of the more common things is that it's your brush calibration, that is, or brush tracking, that is set in a way that it won't allow the brush to perform. Now, if we, again, turn on Enable Brush Calibration with these different settings, you see now I'm back to being able to make thick and thin lines there. Okay, so that was that's kind of what I wanted to tell you about on this, is that depending on the brush, we'll take that off, and I'm going to go back to my Desert Oasis brushes. Now, and let's go back to a paper. I need to open up my papers for a second. Okay. Now let me go back to the paper that I have set up. This is that one, and I've got it set at 60%. There we go. Okay, so now we're back to where we need to be with paper. Okay, so now I've got Expressive bristle set up, and if you look, you'll see it's also a min size. So it's going to go thin or thick, and it's all dependent on that brush tracking. If I change the calibration to this, see now I'm getting a very thin line, but I can't get the thick line. See, so I've got to try and change this to see if I can get the thick line. Wow, my velocity scale went crazy. There we go. See, now I'm back to it. So it really does make a difference. Now, let's look at one other thing though. Watercolor brushes also have there is a type of watercolor brush that if we look at the general watercolor panel, you'll see that the subcategory is real wet replace. Okay, now I'm going to take this down to very dark color, and I'm using Desert Tsunami, which is real wet replace. If I press real hard, that's what I get. Okay, it looks nice. If let me take this and I want to go to real wet watercolor and pause diffusion. And remember, it's also up here. It's this little thing here. Now, I get confused every time. I didn't notice this for a longest time because I kept seeing concentration. And I thought this button was concentration, so I never would hit it. But it's really pause diffusion, and concentration is this slider that comes here. So I can't tell you how silly I felt when I finally found pause diffusion up here. It's really sad. I wrote the developers and telling them it was really hard to get to pause diffusion because you had to go down here and get it, and it needed to be somewhere like the property bar. And it already was on the property bar. So I felt pretty foolish sending them that note. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Real wet replace. All right, so heavy, you get that. If you paint very light, you get nothing. Okay? Now that's because it's set up as real wet replace. In other words, real wet replace, heavy strokes give you paint, lighter strokes give you a lighter amount of paint, and all the way light will bring you back to like water so that you're not getting any kind of paint at all. And I see that people get confused with that. Now if I come back to real watercolor, oops, I don't have to do that, Skippy, you can come up here and click on pause diffusion, then it'll begin to diffuse, and you get this, light area and darker area and so forth. The point is, a lot of people say, I can't get my brush to paint. And they'll say things like, I'm painting as lightly as I can, and nothing's happening. Well, it may be that the brush is set up for, it's going to drive me crazy if this keeps doing this. The brush is set up for real wet replace. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that up. All right, so I think I've kind of finished this. It is extremely important that you work with your pressure settings and try to get pressure set up perfectly for you. Find one of these brushes like You can use Expressive bristle, that's a good one, and play with it to make sure that you can get a thick and thin and fat, you know, line. And if you can get all those, you're good to go. If you can't get them, then, you know, you've got to work on your brush tracking. Now, there's one other thing, too, that I'd like to show you about this stuff. I went to Eastern Water, and I'm going to go to a brush called Bamboo Leaf Veins, and I'm just going to go to black. Okay, bamboo leaf vein will give you a thin or a thick brush stroke, just like that, okay? Where it's important is to be able to make a thin and thick stroke. I wonder why that's, I have the right thing set up. Anyway, you see how what I was complaining about was it looked like I was getting some odd texture. But you see how I'm making a fat and then a very thin kind of brush stroke? That's what you want to get to, is so that you can control these brushes to make shapes that you want to work with, or that will develop a form that you might want to use. Now, in creating this, I'm starting out with a fairly heavy pressure and then lightening up the pressure as I begin to stroke out like that. And if you can't do that, you really want to take one of these brushes and practice this. Because what you'll do if you start practicing that is you'll begin to get the right kind of, that's not it, you'll begin to improve your ability with your Wacom tablet by making these strokes. Okay, I spent a long time on that, but I need you to try and practice. If you're having trouble, you know, with my brushes performing the way you see them when I'm doing something with them, remember that it's probably about brush tracking, and you just need to work on that. You know, start changing your brush tracking to get what you need. All right, that's enough of that one. All right, Karen, is there anything happening over there in the questions? Are people asking anything about what I'm talking about? Or did they all?
Yeah, there was one question.
Yeah, they all left.
One question from Tony. Can you hear me okay, Skip?
Yep.
Okay. This is a good question, because I think this does come up a lot with brush when you're creating brushes or using different brushes. But the question specifically is it possible to make some brushes which only seem to work on a canvas layer work on a by adding a layer? And one of those examples would be maybe one of the Den's oil funky chunky brushes, which tends to work only. And you know, a lot of that just happens to do with the with the general brush control. So maybe you can explain to Tony real quick how he can change a brush that may only work on the canvas layer and have it work on a different layer or a new layer.
Okay, well let's do that real quick. I'm going to go to miscellaneous. That's where I have my Den's brushes, and I'll come in here and we'll grab Den's oils, and we'll just take the funky chunky. Okay, now that we've got the funky chunky, we'll get a color. Okay, so let me get rid of the watercolor layer, and I'm just going to, I'm on a regular layer here at this point. And if I try to paint, nothing happens except right here in the center. If I paint over here, nothing happens. Now, why is it that I can get Dens to paint here, but not here? The answer is, let's go back, undo this till I get all of it gone. All right. You see here, can y'all see that little white spot right there? There's a little bit of paint on this layer. And Dens brushes and other brushes that do not paint on the canvas layer, that do paint on a canvas layer but do not paint on other layers, can paint on another layer provided there's some pixel already there. So it paints either on the canvas layer or it paints in a layer where there is some pixel that's been added. So see, I can't paint over here, but where that little white pixel is, then I can begin to paint. Okay, so if I wanted to paint with a Dens brush, say, I'd probably go to some other brush that I want to go somewhere where it's not watercolor. So let's see, let's go to chalk. All right, so in the real soft chalk, if I take this to white and I just put some white there, okay, I'm not going to be able to see it. Now I'm going to go back to Dens brushes, and I should have pulled them onto a quick custom palette, but I didn't. Okay, we're back to the funky chunky. See again over here, oops, let me put a color on there. Again over here, nothing. But if I go over here where I put that white, you see it's beginning to paint. I swear it is. It's just not painting much. Maybe I lost my white, or didn't get it down there. We're on a default brush. Okay, so let me pull this off so I can get back to it. I hate it when things don't work exactly like they should work. All right, let's go back to chalk. And with real soft chalk, and let's make it gray so we can actually see it. Let me set that up to its default, and there we go. I had the grain setting down low, so it was not really painting much. Okay, now we go back to Dens brushes, and we take that blue color. Nothing out here, but yet I can paint here. Okay. So we know I can paint on a layer and I can paint on the canvas layer. All right, so if I have, let's say I don't want to have any paint on this layer up here and I still want to use the Dens brush. Well, here's what the clue is. If you go to the general brush control panel, you'll notice that the method is drip. Drip brushes only paint on the canvas layer or on another layer that already has pixel on it. So that's a drip. Another brush that does the same thing is the Sargent brush, and the Sargent brush is using plugin. So anything that has a method plugin also would not paint on the canvas layer. You can, however, change this drip method to cover. And then you can change the subcategory to any of these that you like. I'm going to go down here to grainy soft cover. Okay, so now I have the Dens brush changed to cover and grainy soft cover. All right, on a layer, see, it's going to paint. But notice that it doesn't look the same anymore. You know, I'm not getting the same sort of strokes and whatnot. So it's really going to change the look of the brush. You can help with that by going to the well brush control and work with your dry out. Bring that way down, and let's bring the bleed down a bit. I'm going to change it to pressure. And I'm going to switch colors, and I need to go here. Your opacity needs to be set to pressure. Okay. Now what's going to happen, or it should happen, and it doesn't seem like it wants to. You know, that's the way it always is. There we go. You see how it's now blending a bit, but it's never going to have that same drip quality that the brush would normally give you as a drip method, okay? But you can change it then and work on other layers. But if you don't want to change the brush and you want to keep it at its default settings, then as long as you're working on an area that has pixel, see, it will paint for you. So I hope that answered the question. It's not a it's an easy I mean it's yeah. It's easy to understand that it does this. Trying to get beyond it is hard. I tend to never do drip brushes because I think I just don't like the way they work because of the canvas limitation. However, recently, and this would be fun for you guys if you want to try it, if you go to something like my Desert Oasis brushes and change those to drip, and then change it, we'll do grainy drip, and it means I'm going to have to go back down to the canvas layer. But look at how they tend to paint see, you get that same sort of drip. I'm going to take the dry out down. There we go. Now what I'd probably do is change the jitter a little bit. Yeah. So now as you start working, see how that give you a nice dense kind of look, but it also blends and you get those nice like linear brush strokes that are there. I think that's pretty. We ought to save that one, huh, Karen?
That's a beauty.
Yeah, I think we could play with these. I mean, in any of these brushes, any of these down here will be kind of fun. Like if you go to dry sand, I think that's what I'm thinking about. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So we go to dry sand and we change that to drip and grainy drip. And we'll pick another color in here. Oops, I'm on a watercolor layer. Ooh, look at that. Ooh, that's beautiful. Ooh, I like that one. Yes?
Skip, there's a quick question. It might be easier to show than to type out the answer because it might be too long. When you actually get set up a custom palette from your menu,
Right.
Can you just show really quickly how to how to create a custom palette from the window menu and then just add something to it really quickly?
Mm-hmm. We can do that. What I'm trying to do right now, though, is clean. Come on.
That was another question to clear the canvas, and Command A or Control A and then backspace
Right.
is the shortcut for that.
Right, or delete. PC usually uses delete, and the Mac usually uses Control A to select all, and then delete. Where the PC, I think, does use backspace.
Okay,
right?
Great.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I lost the question again. It was to
how do you get actually add a brush to a custom palette from the menu item, or from the window menu, going to window, custom palette, and then just add a brush to it really quickly.
Right. Well, the quickest way to add a brush is not to go up in here and do stuff, but just to come over here and select the brush. And once it's selected, all you have to do is hold the Shift key down and drag it over to your custom palette that you've already created, or just drag it over and let go anywhere on the workspace. So when I let go, it automatically creates a custom palette with a brush. You can take a brush and move it from one palette to another. That just killed that palette. You can take it and move it off of a palette and let go, and that deletes it. You can take the brush and rename it. You can view it as text, or you can set another icon for it, or you can delete it from this palette. Now, those are the ways to get your brush in there. What I think you want to know, though, is what I think is probably more important to know from the window menu is how to add commands. And so if you go up here to custom palettes and you click on
you have a few of them, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I have tons of custom palettes. If you come up here and click on Add Command, then just like in Painter 11 and 10, you get your Add Command box that pops up. But also what happened is you got 3 new menu items that showed up. Let me cancel this and watch. Those 3 items are going to disappear. Ta-da! And so if I go back up to Windows and to Custom Palette and Add Command, notice that they come back up again. Now what that does is it allows you to add more commands than we could ever before. For instance, there was no way to ever add a toolbox command to a custom palette. But you can now, because you've got tools up here, and you click on tools, and here are all of the tools that are in your toolbox. So if I wanted to make a command of layout grid, I just click on layout grid, and it's there. And then I could pick the command or the custom palette I want to put it in. I'm going to put it in 63, which is this one. And you say OK, and there you are. You have your layout grid. So adding commands is much, much easier, and you can add many, many more commands by using those 3 menus up at the top, by going to Custom Palette, Add Command, and you've got panel menus. That means any menu. See, all of these are available to you through the Layers palette or panel. So you can go right here and pick those commands and make them, put them on a custom palette. And here is an other command. These are some obscure commands that were difficult to get to before that are now very easy to get to. And I would recommend everybody kind of take a look at these. I think you'll be surprised at what some of the stuff is. Okay, I hope that answered that question. All right. Another question that came up.
Skip,
sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There was a question regarding your classes, and would somebody, if they took the basics of your brush making, would they be able to understand better how to work brush tracking and how to create brushes?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to get you to understand everything. Well, the first brush making class is, it doesn't cover everything about brush making. That's a 2 or 3 classes to do that. But it will start you understanding how to create brushes. And also, if you're understanding how to create brushes, that means that you'll know how to tweak them on the fly. In other words, as you're painting, you could go in and change little things about a brush, and not necessarily save it, but just change it to be able to use it for a particular painting. So yeah, the brush making class would help you there. But if you're a ranked beginner, don't take it. You need to learn some other stuff first, and then you can take that class. So if you're just starting out, either take Elena's class on beginning Painter, or if you're just starting with Painter 12 but you've been using Painter 11, you can take my New Beginnings class, and then go in and start taking the basic watercolor or the basic brush making class or the elements of watercolor that Joan has and so forth. And by the way, the Painter 12, A New Beginning, is going to go to open enrollment starting in April. So you can enroll in that one at any time, and you'll download all 4 weeks at once, but work them at your leisure. I'll still be around to help out, but it's just going to be open enrollment, so it won't go through the week-to-week process. Okay, so now can I go to another one, or do you have something else I need to answer?
We have some other questions if you want to now, or you can wait till the end.
Well, tell me what some of them are, and let me see.
Super quick question from Tim Shelburne. Question for Skip: Is it correct that we can't use stroke attributes with the wet method?
Correct. Any wet method is not going to allow you to use stroke attributes. Even drip method is not allowing you to use stroke attributes. But wet, no stroke. Cover, yes, you can use stroke attributes. So it varies on what method, whether or not you're going to be able to use stroke attributes. Now, does everybody understand what stroke attributes is? Let's just quickly say that. I'm going to add a new layer, and whatever brush I've got selected, dry sand, we have it at cover, and I'm going to make it grainy soft cover. Okay, so I'm going to paint with this blue color instead of the nice pink that I thought I selected, and I'll put okay, there we go. Ooh, I love that hot pink. Okay, so we've got some paint now on a layer. Now, if I switch to stroke attributes, now what I have is the option of changing the merge mode, and really that's just the composite method. But instead of changing it on the layer, I'm changing it on the brush. So if I change this to gel, and let's go to like a yellow color, that means when I paint over here where there's no paint, I am painting with gel, but it's hard to really show anything. But if I paint here, now do you see how it's acting like a gel layer would? It's transparent and it's affecting the color directly under it. So it means you're painting with your brush has the added ability of painting with a particular composite method. Let's change it to pseudo color. Now when I come in and paint, you see it's going to change the colors. It's going to be yellow out here because there's nothing for it to work with. But as it goes over pigment that's already there, it's going to change the way it looks. If we go to difference, and let's pick a orange here. See how difference changes? Isn't that wild? So you can make some really fun stuff happening with your stroke attributes. but unfortunately not in wet. Now you can get around those things. You could take, like, this is dry sand brush, which is normally a watercolor brush, but I made it a cover. So I could come in and paint on, sorry, let me take that off. I could come in and paint on this layer. I could turn it on, change my color, and we're using different, so I'd come in here and start painting on that. Now after I've done that, I can drop it to the canvas layer and raise it up to a watercolor layer. Or if I had a watercolor that I was working on and I wanted to use stroke attributes, drop it to the canvas, change your brush to whatever you need to change it to so that stroke attributes is working. Do your stroke attributes over your watercolor and then lift it to back up to a watercolor layer. So in essence, you're really getting the same thing that you would have gotten. It's just making it a longer step-by-step method. Okay, anything else? Miss Karen?
Yeah, I'm looking here really quick.
Okay.
GC had a question about what are your 10 to 20 favorite brushes, but I suggested that maybe he could email, or you would email him on that, because I know you have lots and lots of favorites.
Yeah, I'm not, most everybody likes to simplify their brushes and use less and less. I'm the opposite. I want more and more, and that's probably just because I get a kick out of making brushes. You don't need to have that many, but I have fun doing it. So I'm not sure I have a favorite 10 or 20, maybe a favorite 100. Let me go to something else that was asked before the webinar, and that's about paper, making paper, adding paper. How do you make paper from a photograph, and those kinds of things. So I guess the first thing I need is to find a photograph. So let's go up here, File, Open, and I may have something in here. Actually, this might work. I'm trying to find the original photo of that thing, if I can find it. And I don't see it, but this will probably work. Let's open this up. All right, now I've got an image here that it's actually partially painted, but it was a photograph at one point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to drop it to the canvas layer. Okay. Whenever you're making papers and stuff, Painter will appreciate it if you're working on the canvas layer, and really it likes it best if there's nothing even above it. Okay, so if I wanted to make a paper out of this photograph, all I would simply do is go Control-A and then grab my paper panel, and you have paper libraries and you have papers. In this case, you want to use papers. This is your media control papers, or your media or paper control panel, where, as opposed to paper library panel. Paper library panel allows you to add new libraries and do things within the libraries. Paper control panel allows you to make new papers as well as a few other things. Okay, so I've selected this all the way around, and I'm going to go here and go this pop-out menu or option button, and I'm just going to click on Capture Paper. When I click on Capture Paper, a name is going to pop up, and we'll just say Magnolia. And I like to keep crossfade at 0. The standard is about 16, and I've done both. It doesn't really make much difference, and especially where the edges here are mostly white, but I don't see that it makes a lot of difference when I make paper. Now, I could be wrong in that. I just haven't had a lot of success with crossfade. It's probably something I'm doing wrong, but anyway, I don't use it, and I say OK. And there we go. We have the paper texture created. Now, I'm going to delete what's on the canvas layer so that we're not looking at that anymore. All right, and I'm going to come over here to my channels. And the only reason I'm coming over here to the channels menu is because I want to see what this paper looks like that I just created. And if I click on the option button on the channels menu and click on New From, and I go up here and select Paper and say OK, then I will get a channel with the paper. All right, so now you see that the paper I made looked exactly like the image. Now the red we're looking at here, that's just the Rubylith overlay for the channel. But it shows you that I've made the paper. Now what I'm seeing is that it's very pale. And that's because let's go back to bringing that back up. Had I taken this to begin with and changed or worked on the contrast and stuff of the paper would be a lot better. So what would have probably been better to do rather than just making the paper from, the image, is to bring up the underpainting panel, and I would probably change it to black and white first, just apply that. Then I would probably drop my value down and increase my contrast. Oops, that's too much. Drop that down, bring the brightness down a bit, increase contrast. All right, so now I've got a much stronger image here, so I'm going to say OK with that. And again, if I go Control A, and I come to the paper option button, and I capture paper, now I've got Magnolia 2. And we say OK. And with Magnolia 2, again, I'm going to delete what's here. And we'll go back to Channels, click on Options, New From, and Paper. See how much stronger the paper is? So you can make paper from really any image. It can be a texture, it can be a photograph, it can be a painting that you've worked on. You can make, like I said, paper from anything that you want. What you want to do is play with your opacity to determine, not your opacity, but your contrast to try and make it a very strong paper. Now remember, after you've made it, you can also affect its brightness and contrast by using the sliders. But I find that it's a good idea to kind of start with something contrasty, because it's the contrast in the paper that's going to allow the brush to show paper. It's the amount of contrast that allows it to really work well. Okay, now another thing that was brought up was, how do you make it fit the painting that you want to work on? So like if I had a painting that was horizontal and I'm working with this image, how am I going to get that to fit on the horizontal image without any kind of seams? Well, you're not going to get that. You can get that if when you make your paper, or after you've made your paper, you change your scale. Like it's right now at 100%, but if I change the scale so that it's much higher, and I can look right here to see what my height and width are. I want to know what my height and width for my original image is, not this one, but where I'm going to apply the paper. And I start change the scale of it to make it so that it fits as best I can with the current paper. What is better, though, is if you know you're going to be making an image from the paper, from some sort of photograph, I would make your target or make your end image the same size as your paper source is. That way, when you bring it in and open it up at 100%, it's going to fit perfectly on your canvas. So if you can do that, I would start there. Otherwise, it's just a matter of trying to adjust the scale to get as much of your paper onto the surface as possible. Okay, that I think answered the paper question. Okay, you got another question for me, Karen?
Yeah, Skip, a couple of people have asked about your layers palette that you currently have set up right now and why it is they're seeing a texture on your layers palette.
You mean all this stuff here?
Actually, on the untitled image in the back there.
Oh,
yeah.
This one. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
All right. That's actually Tim Shelbourne was the one that I first learned this trick from his site, which is called The Artist's Quarter. He gives wonderful classes over there, so you might want to check it out. But anyway, he created some beautiful watercolor paper textures, and Karen has also created some beautiful watercolor paper textures. And from those textures, Tim went on and created patterns as well. But you can create a pattern from any JPEG just like you would a paper. You just select the whole thing and capture pattern, and you can create a pattern. So what we're doing here is we've added, I'm going to go to my layers panel here. We have canvas layer. I have just a plain layer that I've put in there. And then I have this layer, which is the paper layer. See that? And the way that works is I'm just going to delete this layer. And we now have a plain layer that I'll just delete it. Okay, now I'm going to make a layer. And what I want to do is I want to go to my patterns, patterns library, and I'm going to come down to Tim's traditional watercolor patterns, and I'm going to pick Fabriano Aristico Rough. And the reason I'm picking that is because, if I remember correctly, it is, okay, where'd my paper go? It is the paper that is currently selected, yeah, Fabriano Aristico. And it's at 60% scale. So I've selected the same pattern. I want to come up here, and now I want to open up my media control panel. And I want to go to this Fabriano Aristico Rough that we've got selected, and I want to change the scale to 60% so that it matches the paper texture that I've got selected. Okay, so now that those two things are done, while it's still on that same pattern, I'm going to click on my bucket tool, and I'm going to make sure that source image is selected. Now, what that means, anytime you see, clone source or source image or pattern, when there's no clone source or source image selected, then Painter defaults to pattern as the source image. So because I don't have any clone set up, I can use source image, and pattern is what's going to be used. And all I'm going to do is fill this with pattern. So do click, and there we go. We've got the pattern on this layer. But now the layer is a default layer, so it's opaque, and I would never see anything underneath. So I'm going to change that to gel or multiply. They're essentially the same thing. That will make this transparent, but it's also affecting, it's a little bit of a gray color that's going to affect all of my color. So you want to reduce the opacity of that till it gets a little bit lighter. You can still see your texture so that you think you're really painting on paper texture. It's just an illusion. You're not. This is going to be at the top of the paper stack. The texture you're painting on is whatever canvas you have selected. But this just gives you a visual reminder that the whole paper would normally in traditional world look like this. And these figures of 50%, about 60%, that's just my latest feeling that that's where it needs to be. It's possible that the scale needs to go to 40% or 20%, so it's not quite so rough. And in that case, then I would change my pattern and fill with smaller scale. So scale, you just want to kind of think in terms of the size of your paper and what would the roughness or the scale of that paper be. If it's a really large paper, then the scale is going to be a little bit less than if it's a small paper. It's going to look a little bit, it needs a little more scale to it. But that's all that is. And then essentially you lock the layer. Oops, I just deleted it. Essentially you lock the layer, and then you come back down to the canvas layer. And now if I wanted to paint with a watercolor brush, I could come in here and just, pick a watercolor brush. This is Soaked Edge. And we'll just, such a nice, sweet brush that you can make thick and thin. I mean, not thick and thin, but lighter or darker. You can blend out so that there's hardly any paint showing. And then when it finally diffuses, you're going to get those nice diffuse or pooled edges where the paint is thicker and not where it's thinner. Now, if you change the paper, not the paper on top, but the paper underneath, then it is going to affect the way the paint looks. This is really important. Look at the difference in these two. You see how this has a much sharper line to it than the other one? You can probably see it better on something like, let's see, Grainy Edge would probably do it better. Let's go to a little darker color. Now this is that, see that look of that? Now if we go back to the Fabriano Aristico rough and do the same thing, see how different that looks, those textures? It really, really does make a big difference. Look at that texture. See, and when it blends out, you lose some of that stuff, but it really gives you a very neat looking brush. So paper is real important. But that should have answered how you put the paper on top. It's just, it really is just an illusion. I love this texture and the way it works with these brushes. Sometimes it's just really neat. Look at that. I love that wild texture there. Okay. All right, so we got anything else?
I think we're good to go. You're at about 205.
Okay, perfect. I'm at 205 or 105? 205 for
Sorry,
somebody.
105.
Yeah, 205 for somebody. Okay, yeah, I think it's probably time to quit. Yo, I hope this was helpful to you. It really was. I appreciate you coming. This was very helpful for me to try and go through this and sort of play and get the feel of it. I'm feeling like I'm not all that keen on the real silence that's happening. I need noise to work. I didn't get to talking about the inside of the process of painting or how to try out new brushes, and we'll try to get to those at another webinar. Feel free to post, comments about the webinar. Give me any kind of information that might be helpful, that will tell us how to run the webinars better, or that you think would help. I mean, feel free to just say anything you like. Don't be mean, please. Remember, these are free. So anyway, just, constructive criticism I'd be glad to take. What I'll do on the next ones is I'll plan them a little bit better. Like I said, this one I just wanted to give it a try and see how it worked. I will go ahead and convert the recording this afternoon, and I'll try and have it posted on the site by late afternoon or early evening. And I guess that's it. Anybody else have a last minute question? Cool. Well,
I'm looking over anything to see if there's anything here, but everybody had a great time, it looks
great,
like. And
great.
I did mention to a couple of people that if they did have other questions for you, they could email you.
Right.
And to make sure that everybody knows about Skip Allen paints for the Desert Oasis brushes that you're using today.
Right. Yeah. That on my blog, the Desert Oasis brushes, they're not on a brush page by themselves yet. They're just on the post about Desert Oasis, so you have to kind of look for that post. It's in the last 5 or 6 posts that you can find the download for Desert Oasis. It looks like we had about, the last time I looked, I saw 81. I don't know if we ever got higher than that or not, but that's a good turnout. We didn't fill up past the 100, which is good. That gives me an idea that the 100 is probably the correct number. Now, if our attendance starts growing, then I'll have to decide if I can add more seats or what. Okay, really, I really appreciate everybody coming. And Karen, thank you so much for helping out. That made a lot better, not having to fool with looking at the panel there. So I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Happy,
my pleasure, Skip.
Right. I hope everybody had a happy holiday this past couple of days, and it's time to get back at it. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everybody. If I can figure out how to close it. Yeah, there it is. Bye-bye.